That was like anthemic. You're all there, okay. So I started going blind when I was 18. It took about 5 years. And it was, yeah, it's a crappy hand. But it's not so bad. I mean, you piss between urinals and you don't read People magazine. It's not like... But this terrifying thing happened. About 2 months after I was diagnosed with losing my sight, I heard this guy on the radio, and he talked about how he lost his sight. He was the first guy I'd heard with the same condition. And he talked about, to this interviewer, and the interviewer asked him what he does all day, and he said, well, most of the time I sleep. And that scared the bejesus out of me. Like, blindness didn't scare me. Boredom scared the hell out of me. So writing sort of came to me later in life as a way to combat boredom and a way to deal with that fear. And it's a way I see now. I actually write so I can see the world word by word, one in front of the other, like footsteps, taking me out into a world that's a little bit bigger than this 3-foot sweep that I live inside otherwise. And naturally, the place it's taken me in the last few years is into travel writing, which is something blind people probably shouldn't do. But it's taken me into travel writing, and of course I'm working on a travel book now called Nothing to See Here. So this magazine phoned me, and it's out of San Francisco. It's called Afar, and they have this fantastic column called Spin the Globe. And what they do is they have a globe in the editorial office that has the name of every country on a piece of paper inside, and they spin it, and they pick one at random, and they send an author to that country. But the thing is, you don't know where you're going until you get to the airport. So I said, oh yeah, I'll do that. That'll be fun. It's just blindness in another version. So it's a couple weeks before I'm supposed to go on my trip to where I don't know, and they phone me, and they say, can we talk to your wife? And I'm like, why? And they said, well, it's not Libya, and it's not Japan. Because at that time, the Fukushima thing was happening. And I'm like, okay. So they phone my wife, and they're like, well, we're a little uncomfortable with what we drew, but we don't want to condescend and say he can't go. So we thought maybe we'd run it by you, and you could decide if Ryan should go there or not. And if you want to tell him, that's okay. We sort of get it. It's the thing. It's complicated. So Tracy, my wife, says, okay. So they tell her where I'm going, and she falls on the floor laughing. Because, of course, that's where I'm going. So she picks me up at work. And I get in the car, and I'm like, well? And she said, I just need 3 days to do some reading. I'm like, why? And she said, it's not Libya, and it's not Japan. But it's not Ireland either. And she's like, what? And I'm like, well, this is not good. I don't want to go there. And she goes, well, what are your deal breakers? And I'm like, this conversation is the deal breaker. If we're having this conversation, I'm not going. And she goes, well, what are you really worried about? And I'm like, babe, I can't find a bottle of water in New York City. Am I going to be on a mule in Mongolia looking for the town pump? I mean, I don't know how to do anything. And she said, well, I mean, there are certain things I just don't know if you'd be comfortable with. And I said, it's not like they're going to send me to Cairo. So 2 weeks later, I'm on a plane going to Egypt. And the revolution had just started. Now, this is the reason why I did it. I mean, I was very conflicted about it, but it has occurred to me over the years of writing that the best experiences don't invite you. They don't want you. That's why I write movies in Hollywood. You can figure that out. I mean, like, they got blind people describing movies now. They're really that bankrupt. So I decided, the best things don't invite you, so I'll go. So I fly into Cairo, and in my plane, there are 2 people in the cabin. There's an Egyptian woman who's coming home, and there's me. And we touch down in this British Airways flight in Cairo, and I'm leaving the plane, and the stewardess and the pilot are standing there to see us off, and the pilot says to me, are you alone? And I'm like, I don't know. I think so. And he goes, do you want some help? I'm like, sure. So they threw me on the bus with all the stewardesses. Now, I want to make sure that he gets his due, this pilot. This is a British Airways pilot. He puts me on the bus with the stewardesses. The pilot takes me in through the airport and does my immigration papers. The pilot exchanges my money. The pilot finds my suitcase. The pilot takes me to the parking lot to find a driver, puts my suitcase in the trunk, and gives me his cell phone number, quote unquote, just in case. To be helped so much assumes the need to be helped that much. So at this point, I am now assuming that the Cairo airport was going to kill me. And now I'm going into the city, which will be so much easier. So I get into this car, and we're driving, and all Cairo sounds like is cars. It is just horns honking, sort of like birds chirping in the distance everywhere, and it just smells of car exhaust. And I imagine Cairo is like huffing on a tailpipe. And we're like driving through the city, and it is chaos. And we get to my hotel in Zamalek, and I get inside, the taxi driver takes me up, and these two clerks at the desk in the hotel give me this wonderful glass of lemon juice that just cuts through the exhaust fumes in my mouth. And I say, "Is there a restaurant nearby I can walk to?" And the air leaves the room. And they don't answer because they're busy trying not to laugh. I'm like, "No, seriously, is there somewhere I can walk to?" And they're like, "Sir, you can't walk anywhere." I'm like, "I'm Canadian, I'm fine." And so I leave. And I go down and I go out of the hotel, and I'm going to describe to you what a Cairo sidewalk is like. So you walk out of the door of the hotel, you turn right, you drop 2 feet into the gravel, and then you walk along, and there's stairs at a 35-degree angle that go back up to the sidewalk where there's a post in the middle of the stairs. And when you step around that, there's a car. And I go back in, I say, "I can't walk anywhere." And they pat me on the back, like, "Good for you for trying," right? And so they take me out to a taxi, and they fold me in with a bunch of corner guys that are hanging out in the corners, like 8 men trying to fold me into this car. And I give them all tips, right? I'm so thankful that somebody can fold me properly into a car. And I get into this taxi, and I am smart because I know I cannot speak Arabic. So I get the hotel guys to write my address in Arabic on a piece of paper so I can just give it to the taxi driver to get home, right? So going in this taxi to get something to eat. They take me to a restaurant, it's about 5 minutes away, and I sit down, and I'm so excited because I get this big bowl of molokhaya, which is this sort of viscous green soup, and they put rice in it, and I start eating, and now my mouth has seen more of Cairo than I have. And I'm tasting this city and all its history. And I keep eating, and I am so damn full, but I don't want to be rude, so I keep eating to finish it. And I keep eating, and now I'm getting a little bit queasy. But I keep eating, and finally I just tap out, like on the mat in a wrestling match. I'm like, "Okay, I can't do this." And then the guy leans over, he says, "Are you happy, sir?" And it turns out he was standing there ladling in more as I ate. And I obligingly kept eating. So now I'm not feeling so good, and I want to go home. So I go out to the taxis that are waiting, and they put me in one, and I give the guy my card and with the name of my hotel. And that's when I discover that most taxi drivers are illiterate. And in Cairo, nobody can find a street. You have to do it by rumor. You ask people. And so that's what we did. We drove off into the night. I knew it was about 5 minutes away. And about every 15 minutes, he pulled over onto a sidewalk and just starts shouting at somebody and waving the piece of paper. And then we turn around and go another direction. And we searched for the rumor of where I was supposed to live. So we're driving around like that, and we get to this intersection. It's now been 45 minutes. And I'm getting a little nervous. And we pull up at this intersection, and I hear my taxi driver shout to a guy on a motorcycle through his window. And then my taxi did this strange thing. He backed up down the middle of the street between all the cars, and the motorcycle turned and followed us. And then we turned off onto a side street, and I can hear this motorcycle following us. And then it tore ahead of us. And then suddenly my taxi stopped, and he said, "Okay, get out." And I think, where? Are we in Utah now? Like, I have no idea where we could be. So I get out of this taxi in the middle of the street, and I run to the edge of the street where there is no sidewalk. There's just gravel and then stairs at a 35-degree angle. And I'm walking along there feeling like a mouse along the edge, and then I hear footsteps running towards me, many footsteps, people running at me. So I reflexively cover my wallet, and I'm like, "Oh, it's the old days, we're gonna fight." And I turn around, and these guys grab me and swing me around, and it's my cornermen who I'd tipped, who had folded me into the taxi. And they practically carried me into my hotel. And it went like this for the next 4 days. As long as I was within a block of my hotel, I heard these guys come running. And it was like my own private social network. Right? The natural question is, how do blind people live in a city like this? Which is what I began to worry about. And so I tracked down an institution in Heliopolis, which is where I spent my last day. And in Heliopolis, there's a building for blind women, and they range in age from 4 to 40, and there might be 300 of them there. And their families will drop them off there when they're young to be raised there, maybe to learn how to sew, maybe to read. But the one thing they do at this institution that is totally weird is they teach these women instruments, and they have their own orchestra of blind Egyptian women, 37-piece orchestra who play by ear. Now that is something I had never heard before, which is why I travel. It's like the question, if you had to go somewhere in the world to see something, people say the Eiffel Tower, the Grand Canyon. But if you had to go hear something, how far would you go to hear blind women play in an orchestra that you'll never hear anywhere else in the world? And before I left that day, I asked the woman who ran the institution, I said, I gotta know, how do they get around? I can't walk down the sidewalk. And she said to me, well, they don't use guide dogs for religious reasons. Dogs are dirty. And they don't use canes because it's too shameful. I said, so what do they do? And she said, they feel with their hands as they walk down the street. And it was an image that still haunts me. It's in my mind's eye, the blind women of Heliopolis groping their way down the streets. And it's amazing when you get an image like that, right? Because it's something I never saw. And it's something I never would have imagined seeing, but it doesn't matter. It's still an image that I got. And that's the thing I want you to take away, is that as a writer, the thing I can boil years of experience down to is an image can change you. An image goes inside you, and it's like DNA. It stays in you, and it changes you. And you carry that image with you forever. And that image will always stick with me. And as I left that hotel, or that institution, the driver was driving me back, and he said very excitedly, that's Tahrir Square, that's where it started. And so I rolled down my window and I pretended to look outside. Thanks.